Ik mag jullie vanavond uitnodigen om mee te gaan naar een geheime plek. Een plek waar boeken nooit doodgaan, maar bewaard blijven, waar ze nooit zullen verdwijnen. Waar elk boek een ziel heeft. De ziel van degene die het geschreven heeft en de ziel van degene die het gelezen heeft en erover gedroomd heeft. Want boeken zijn een spiegel van de ziel. Ze reflecteren alleen wat je al in je draagt. En daar op die geheime plek worden de boeken bewaard die niemand zich herinnert. Welkom vanavond op het Kerkhof van de Vergeten Boeken. Welcome to the cemetery of forgotten books.
Thank you very much.
Ik mag jullie voorstellen, Carlos Ruiz Zafón.
Thank you. Good evening. Good evening, everybody. Now they make some noise. At first I thought they were dummies. Or
But
they
they
very shy. Hello.
They're in the dark, but probably I think they will make more noise because we may invite you to ask some questions too at the end of the interview, if that's okay
Sure, and
by you.
they can throw objects and things if they want, you know.
So if
or Visa cards or checks, donations, we also take that. Everything is welcome.
Practical information, but also maybe questions that come up while listening to you. Shall I call you Carlos or shall I call you Mr. Zafón?
Of course, that's my name. Please do.
I have a question about the Cemetery of Forgotten Books. It's a place where you can go on your own, but where you can also take someone with you. But it's always someone that you trust and that you love a lot, isn't it?
It is. The Cemetery of Forgotten Books is in many ways a sanctuary. It's a secret place. It's a place maintained by people who love books and quite often to keep books from being destroyed or banned or damaged. So you have to be careful who you introduce in a place like that, because in the same way that most people who are introduced in the Cemetery of Forgotten Books are people who love literature, love language, love books and want to protect them, we also been running into quite a few characters in these stories who are not exactly like that and would love to know where this place is, maybe to destroy it or set it on fire. You always have to be very careful.
Yes, you have to be very careful, and in that sense it struck me that Daniel Sempere takes the girl he's in love with, Bea, already to the cemetery on their first date.
That's it. He wants to impress the girl, so he decides to bring her to this place, which is actually very impressive. That's why the guardian, Isaac, when he sees Sempere there bringing the girl, goes like, "Oh my God!" And but he's a good guy, so he knows, he trusts Daniel, and he knows that Bea also is trustworthy. He has a good instinct for that, and it turns out to be a right decision to bring Bea into the Cemetery of Forgotten Books.
And he also warns Daniel. He says you have to make marks because it's possible that you don't find your way back anymore.
Yeah, and that's it. It's a labyrinth after all. You know, it's a place that has many secrets and many more secrets that we're going to find out about in the future. And I think in some parts of the second book in the series, The Angel's Game, we actually hear about mysterious events that happened at the Cemetery of Forgotten Books, and we hear about this mysterious man in black that sometimes you run into while you're going through the corridors and the rooms and the many parts.
Is he really there, or is it a vision?
It's a vision. It's a metaphor. It's many things. It's a place of the imagination, a place of language, a place of ideas. So what is there, what's not there, sometimes depends on the eye of the beholder.
Mm-hmm. Is it a place that really exists, you think, or only in your memory?
Well, many people seem to think so.
Do we all each have our own cemetery of forgotten books, you think?
Maybe some people have at home, but actually some people are convinced that this place exists in the city of Barcelona. And I've been asked many times. I remember years ago I was in Australia, and this lady comes up to me with a map of the city. I say, "I'm going to be in Barcelona in about 2 months. Could you please
Did that really
mark
happen?
and there where the cemetery is, because I plan to visit?" And I said, "Well, baby, I have bad news for you. You know, the street is right there. So if you get into a street, you're going to find many things except books." And actually there was a trip of many British booksellers that were taken there by my publishers, and they were so keen about exploring this street, which actually is a gateway into what used to be the so-called red light district. So when they were told that actually instead of books they would find some other kind of entertainment, they will run into there. So there goes to tell you can never trust booksellers.
But it is in a street in Barcelona, and it appears to be a kind of, it could be in a kind of theater?
It is. The street is right there. It's Arco del Teatro, and it's this kind of mysterious street at the end of the Ramblas, which actually there's an arc, and it's next to what is Barcelona's oldest theater. And that was one of the entrances into what was known as El Raval, which is this district that for many years was the red light district, and nowadays is mostly an immigrant district. There are a lot of people from Northern Africa. It has changed a lot over the years, but it used to be this kind of deep working class district where people and generations from families in Barcelona had lived, and it's almost kind of a labyrinth of streets, very narrow, very dark, very damp, and most of the people who lived there were kind of poor. The housing is a small, it's a very old section of town, and way until I would say the 80s, it was like that, and I think it started to change around the 1990s.
Yeah, because you, Mr. Zafón, you became so immensely popular, and the Shadow of the Wind as well, that they are touristic guides of Barcelona.
There are a number of tours and tourist guides of which I have no relation with.
You don't.
You know, I don't have a cut.
But it's a kind of a compliment, or not, to you?
Well,
does it annoy you?
I think it's an interesting thing. I think that sometimes when you go to different cities, there are tours that use literature or famous books to kind of explore its city. If you go to London, you can do Dickens tours or Sherlock Holmes tours or things like that. And if you go to Paris, you can investigate the Paris of Victor Hugo or Dumas or things like that, or Balzac. So I think it's interesting to try to explore a city, its history, its geography, way beyond the purely touristic kind of Disneyland that now every city in Europe has. There's a central district that tends to be pedestrian. You find the same shops, the same cafes, and people go there, and it feels like you haven't really left home. It's the same as where you live. And I think that it's interesting, for instance, using the excuse of these books about my Barcelona to try to get deeper into the history of the place and find things that are actually very interesting, because the history of Barcelona is very rich, very interesting, very dramatic. And there are things that I think that both to visitors and to locals allow them to sometimes rediscover their own cities from different eyes and find out things about the place they were born that they didn't know about. So in that sense, I think it's interesting, and there's no harm done about literary tours. You know, it could be worse, so it's fine.
But it might be a bit disappointing at some point that where they have imagined a scenery and then the confrontation with the reality is something else?
I don't know. You may think so. For what I gather, I've never been in one of those tours, but from what I gather, people like them and enjoy them because they allow them to get deeper into the history of the city, to know more things, to find answers to questions that maybe they came up with, they were reading, they became curious about a specific place or the history of something that is mentioned in the books. And they want to know more about that, and maybe they explore that, and I think people sometimes like to see the places they've read about and they have imagined a scene, and they want to touch that and see what's the difference, or if there's any difference with what they imagine. So I think it's an interesting way of discovering a place.
Because the Barcelona you write about, you already said it, it's my Barcelona. It's a character.
My Barcelona because it's a heavy stylization of the city. I never wanted to always say, you know, I don't write touristic guides, or I'm not a journalist, I'm a novelist. So what I've tried to do is take the city, and while being extremely faithful to its factual history, to its geography, every shop I use, every house, every stone, every corner, every street, every palace, every mansion exists or has existed. There are a few places that have been destroyed or lost in time, but I'm very faithful to that. So what I'm trying to do is take what is there, what has happened, and to dramatize it, and to dramatize it with a heavy stylization that could be described as Gothic or Baroque or very, very, very stylish. And in the same way that a painter or a photographer may approach a city, and of course you take what is there, but then you rework it and you stage it differently, and you find the angles and you find the colors and the photography, and you light it, and you create something based on what is there that you could superimpose and matches exactly. But it's in this case, it's a literary creation, and that's what I say, that it's my Barcelona, because it's not exactly as it is, but it's as if it were, because I'm treating it more as a character than as a setting. Yeah. And I do with it what you do with characters. You design costumes for characters, you make makeup, you write lines for them, and you write a part, you give them stage directions, you move them around, and you write a play for them to act. Yeah. And you take them and you move them, and that's what I'm trying to do with the city.
And I think it's a tribute to the city too, and it's an interesting confrontation, I think, with the magic realism, the style you write in, and history that is always close by. A lot of references to Franco. History is always there. What the history did to the city, you reflect that.
This is, as I was saying, a way of being very respectful of historical period, and trying not to frivolize it. Not trying to depart too much from it, and trying to actually use history and trying to interest readers into finding out more about the period, more about the city, more about its history. And I'm not trying to lecture anybody or trying to, but I'm always being very respectful of things and trying. I think that there are things that you should not really, even if as any writer, any novelist, you're using fantasy, you're using the imagination to stage stories, and you create characters that never existed, and you do things like that. I think it's also very interesting to play around with that line that separates reality from the purely dream world of this fully imagined Barcelona. So we're always stepping a little bit in the middle, and I think that makes the drama more intense. The fact that if you actually want, you can take the book in your hands and go find every single place you've read about, and you'll find it, and you can touch it, and it is as it's described in the novel. But of course, in the novel, it is a stage, it is painted, it is photographed, it is stylized in a very, sometimes in a very extreme way to make it more dramatic or more in the service of the plot and the characters, but the base is there.
Yeah, and then there's a character of Fermín, who is very critical to history, is critical to Franco, to the banks, and that's a thankful character, I think, to give some of your own thoughts, maybe, about history.
Fermín is a man struggling to be decent in a profoundly indecent world. But
he's a gentleman, no?
He is indeed a gentleman. He's a man who's trying very hard to be a good person, to become a better man, even when life is giving him ample reasons not to be. And he could, but this is a man who's trying to be loyal to his friends, to the people he loves. He's trying to be true to his heart, to the things he believes in. And he's a good man. And he's a good man in a man in which very few good men are around. And that creates a lot of problems for him, because essentially he won't accept the bullshit or the lies or all these things. And he's honest. And of course, you know, being honest in a world like that creates a lot of problems and takes a lot of courage. But that's Fermín. He's a hero, an imperfect hero, but hero.
I think for the readers, he's a hero too. Is that why you came back to him in the third book?
Well, I always knew I was going to come back to Fermín in the third book, because Fermín, in many ways, is the moral center of these stories. Fermín is the man that plays the role that in classic tragedies or plays is like the fool in the play. It is the man that, because it is assumed he's either crazy or he's a buffoon, he speaks the truth when nobody else does. So he's able, in his own very flamboyant and very over-the-top way, and he expresses himself sometimes in outrageous terms and says things that seem ridiculous. But if you think about it, at the bottom of it, everything he says and does has a strong moral ground, and he's the man who sees clearly through everything, through fakeness, through lies, through hypocrisy, and he's the one who keeps it there, and he has a very clear vision. That's why, even though in the first book of the series, In the Shadow of the Wind, he apparently is a secondary character, a picaresque character that Daniel runs, apparently by chance, in the streets of Barcelona.
Apparently.
Apparently. Now, we found out that essentially Fermín wasn't there by chance. That was not a coincidence of fate. There was a reason for Fermín to be that night in the rain by the Plaza Real when Daniel gets there and is shocked to find the object of his ridiculous infatuation with the music teacher. And Fermín was there for a reason. And Fermín has been keeping a secret, a terrible secret, for many, many years. And here in this book, In the Prisoner of Heaven, Fermín will unveil the secret because circumstances, the apparition of a very sinister stranger from the past, precipitate that he can no longer hold a secret, that he's been trying to hide to protect Daniel from the truth and to protect the people he loves. But now he cannot do it anymore. And when he opens this Pandora box of the secret, he's going to take us straight into the heart of the secret that lies in this saga of the Cemetery of Forgotten Books.
Yes, and in that sense, he is, and that we found out in the third book, because it's interesting to read back the first book, isn't it? While having read now the third book, you see that he actually is the guardian angel of Daniel, and that he wasn't there.
He wasn't
apparently
there. One of the things
in the first book.
Yeah, one of the things about these books is that they're designed to act as standalone stories. If you read Shadow of the Wind, you think, well, okay, that's it. There's a story that begins and ends. If you read The Angel's Game, okay, that's a story. And if you read this one, you feel a story that is leading you to many things, linking, but you know, that's a story of what happened to Fermín. But the idea is that each one of these books, regardless of which order you may read them, allows you to reinterpret the other books, the other stories. Yeah. So this is designed as a labyrinth, as a Chinese box of stories with different ports of entry. Depending on what port you take, your itinerary, your way through the labyrinth is different, and your experience as a reader is different. And the story is constantly rearranging itself. It's like a cubic group, you know, of stories, and it keeps twisting, and it keeps twisting, and the puzzle and the pieces shift again. And then if you read The Prisoner of Heaven, everything you read about in The Angel's Game, the previous book, completely changes its meaning. And then suddenly a lot of the things that many readers say, well, you know, this doesn't make any sense. I don't understand the story, where it's going, what is David Martin doing, all that stuff. And suddenly you understand what was going on. And also you reinterpret many of the events in Shadow of the Wind that apparently didn't have any more implications. Actually, they did. And so that's the idea behind this, to have these 4 different books that are standalone stories, but at the same part, they're part of something bigger. They're a story that allows you to explore it from many different angles.
That means that you have made the storylines already in advance. You know exactly what, before starting to write The Shadow of the Wind, you knew exactly what was going to happen in the 4 books.
Well, I needed to know, because this is, in many ways, is like building a cathedral made of different parts. And sometimes you may build a cathedral and you build the central vault. If you only build that, that's when people looking at the building say, well, this is the cathedral. And say, no, wait a minute. I'm going to add another section. And I'm going to put a tower in here. And I'm going to put another tower.
It's like architecture to you?
And it's pretty much about the architecture, about, you could say, the engineering of this thing, which is pretty complex. And of course, you need to know in advance what are the general lines, the grand design of the story. But at the same time, because I knew that it would take me years to write these books, and I knew that I was going to grow as a person or change. It's been more or less, it's going to be about 10 years of work from beginning to end. So I knew that down the line, I would find flaws in my design. I would find things that I thought were right, but then when I was going to execute them, they would reveal flaws or structural flaws or things that didn't interest me anymore, or that would make me think, I thought that I wanted to take this character in this direction, but I think it's more interesting. I'm more interested now in doing something else or exploring another angle or twisting it around. And then I have to be very careful because I already have part of the structure standing there.
You're already stuck in some parts.
So there's a technical complication to all this, but that's part of the challenge of trying to build the puzzle that is organic in the sense that it keeps evolving, it keeps changing, but of course needs to adjust to specific lines. Otherwise, the whole thing would collapse on top of you, and you would say, well, what the hell is he doing?
And you still have a fourth book to write, so everything has to come together.
And
it can't
then
fall
there's the
down.
fourth final book, which is going to be the most complex of them all, and in which, of course, not only the pieces will click, but there will be an additional twist to all this that is going to put things in a different perspective. So even though by the end of The Prisoner of Heaven, which acts almost as a link to most of the stories and gives you the impression that you finally figure it out what is all this about and say, I know what is going to happen. And Danielle wants revenge, and now they're going to go after this bad guy, and so and so. There are a number of surprises awaiting the readers.
Surprises, but we will know the answer.
The wheels keep turning, and hopefully, if everything is realized in the way I have envisioned it, readers are in for quite a few surprises yet.
We will get to know where is Mauricio Valls and who is the father of Daniel Semperi. We
may find out a lot of stuff.
We will? Okay.
Hopefully so.
And you're still thinking about that now because you're traveling for this book now.
It happens at least usually every time I publish a new book, there's a year after that in which I tend to travel either promoting or presenting the book, and it usually takes at least 1 year. Years ago, it went on for longer, and it was a time which I spent almost 3 years going around the world talking about a book I had written 3 years before and thinking, I need to get back to work, this is not my job. My job is to write. It seems like I become a politician, that I'm doing meetings and kissing babies and bullshit like that. And I said, never again. Next time it's going to be 1 year. I'm going to give it 1 year, which also allows me, I think, to mature and to think about the next book, because even though many things are pre-designed, are a structure, the most important things which actually have to do with tempo, with texture, with timbre, with color, with trying to define the keys to the style to each one of these books, on how the language is going to be structured. These things which apparently may seem very technical, but actually the most important elements in each book, not the plot. The plot is almost irrelevant. These are the things that really provide the reading experience. And I want that each one of these books, I feel that they should have a different texture, a different personality. Each one, they are similar, they are connected, but each one of them provides a different reading experience. And I need to know exactly how I'm going to do that. And so it's good for me to have these months while I'm traveling away or while I'm there trying to find out, so the time I really get deep into the actual work, I am prepared. And so it's a good thing. Working. And in the meantime, I get invited to places like this, nice places, and see
lovely
nice
theater.
People like this. So it's always welcome.
So
it's an excuse not to work. Writers.
It's a nice way of working.
The greatest single talent novelists have is finding reasons not to work. So I say, I cannot work. I need to promote the book. My pencils are not sharpened. There's a bird outside my window. I cannot write if there's a bird outside my window. though, there's always a reason not to work.
Because it's hard work as well, not being alone and thinking, and now we're seeing people. Maybe it inspires you as well.
Yeah, sure, why not?
Let's talk about the prisoner of heaven again. There's something about David Martin that I don't understand. He's, in spite of himself, almost always a writer in command, and it makes him unhappy. He does it again in prison, of course, because he has to. Mauricio Valls makes him write on his command, but it makes him unhappy.
Well, David Martin is a complex character. David Martin is essentially a man who's losing his mind. He's been losing his mind little by little since he was a child. He's a broken soul, he's a broken man. And The Angel's Game is essentially the chronicle of a man descending into the abyss of his own madness, seen from inside. So he's trying to hold on to his life, to what he thinks is real, to what happened on paper, and putting it on paper because he's a writer, and that's what he does. And
The Angel's Game,
and
actually.
he writes The Angel's
Beautiful.
Game. And we learned when we were reading The Prisoner of Heaven that the book we read before, The Angel's Game, is actually a manuscript that David Martin writes in prison.
In secret, because he's not supposed to.
In secret, because he's supposed to be writing some other thing for this character who's forcing him, who's kind of blackmailing him into ghost write a book for him. But he is so aware that he's losing his mind, that every day that passes he's less and less aware of if the things he remembers, the things he sees are real or not. And he wants to leave a testament of that. So essentially, of course, he's a self-destructive character from his very childhood. One of the things I was trying to do with The Angel's Game was to explore, in the same way that the Shadow of the Wind is the story of a reader, is somebody who discovers the wonder and the miracle of literature as a reader, and what books mean to him, what literature mean to him. In this case, I decided to take some of a cursed writer, somebody who is self-destructive, who is trying to survive and who's losing his sanity, and transform this memoir or write it in the same way as one of his novels. Because
like Julian Carrick's, actually.
In the same way, because Shadow of the Wind, I felt that would be cool, but that if Shadow of the Wind should feel or read as if it were a novel by Julian Carax. And we've been reading about how the books of Julian Carax are. So Shadow of the Wind is designed to read as a novel by Julian Carax. The Angel's Game, which is different, is designed to play as a book by David Martin. And David Martin writes Victorian Gothic serials. He writes what used to be called penny dreadfuls. So his memoir, the story of his life told by himself, becomes a penny dreadful and an homage.
Is he an inferior writer then? Does he struggle with the idea as well? Are you an inferior writer when you are a writer in command, or a writer of the kind of tales that David Martin writes?
He's not myself. I think sometimes people assume that because David Martin is a writer and he's writing in the first person and he's telling his story, that's who I am, that's the character that I am. And I'm a very different person from David Martin. I mean, personal circumstances are very different. I may be also crazy, that's another matter, it's not for me to say, but I don't think I'm as crazy as David Martin is. And actually, of course, you give things of yourself or your experiences of things you've observed in other writers, in what is the writing life to him. But essentially, David Martin is very far away from me, from my own circumstances. It's a literary creation. There are other characters who actually are much closer to me, and Julian Carax probably is the character. I always saw Julian Carax as a caricature of myself when I was writing.
In what way?
In one way, I don't know. It's an in-joke I have with myself. You know, I think there are parts of me that become different characters. One is Fermin, not in the sense that I'm such a good and heroic man as Fermin, because I would like to be such a great person as he is, and I'm not. But a lot of his views, his sense of humor, the way he expresses, for me, is like a little devil that inhabits my brain. And he takes about 25%, 30% of my brain. And I keep him there. Every once in a while, I open the cage and say, okay, go out there, do your thing, and come back. And for me, it's a part of myself. In the same way that Julián Carax probably is the character that I resemble most. And also Daniel has things of me, and I would like to be more like Daniel than Carax, but unfortunately I'm more like Carax than I'm like Daniel. Daniel would be a very innocent version of my younger self, but unfortunately, you know, he also has some differences. So I think when you create characters, you take things of yourself, your own experience, and you give it to them, and that's how you try to. Sometimes there are characters to which you cannot give anything. You need a character that is going to perform a function, and you say, do I find something inside of myself, no matter how deep, that I can give to this character? And sometimes you can't. And
being a writer, David Martín, he struggles with jealousy, isn't it? And with the critics, is it also a little bit this book a settlement with your critics? People that say he writes easy literature for the masses. Is it a settlement with your critics?
No, it's not a settlement, because I don't really need to settle anything. You know, this is said of anybody who succeeds or is fortunate enough to succeed in literature in other fields. It is a cliche that you hear everybody say, well, I don't want to succeed. I only want to have 300 readers in the world because everybody else are idiots and nobody can appreciate my genius, and only my mom realizes how good I am. And say,
with high literature, is that the high literature
or
described?
High or low or medium.
Intellectuals.
Well, you know, self-appointed intellectuals.
Self-appointed.
I think quite often it's Andreas Corelli who's malicious. At some point defines most intellectuals as people who usually are not distinguished by their intellect. And sometimes, unfortunately, that's the case. So I think life is very short to try to argue with things that are transparent. You know, it's whatever, it's fine. And so that's not really the issue. I think what it's interesting is when you're discussing literature and something, I'm trying to get into that, because the books are about writers, publishing, about readers, about all those things, is the preconceived notions, the destructive preconceived notions of people trying to convince you what you should be thinking, not just about literature, about everything.
That's what Corelli does also with David Martín. No, he makes him think, whereas he's malicious, he makes him think.
But Corelli is trying to work into these mechanisms. Corelli has an agenda, and he hires whom he believes is a talented person to help him in this endeavor, which is to write a book that actually is going to manipulate how people feel and think. And that's what he hires Martín, and says, Martín, but I'm not your person. I don't believe in any of these things or anything. Why you want me? I say, you know, I want the craft. I don't care about the content. I don't believe in those things either. You know, we're in an endeavor to set the world on fire.
Still, he goes back to the meetings with Corelli, so something doesn't intriguing about him. David Martín, he always goes back to the meetings with Corelli, not only because he got the money.
I think he becomes a strange companion.
Yeah.
You know, Corelli is this strange shadow that appears in his life and hires him, but in the same way he's keeping him alive. He's providing him with a purpose. So it's a part, we don't really know if Corelli exists because nobody else sees him. It's something that just...
Is he a kind of God because he brings a new Christina in the end of the Angel's Game?
Well, apparently both Christina and David are broken people. That's the story. Their story is a story that is a tragedy because essentially they're broken souls from the beginning. She's a woman that feels that her life doesn't belong to her, that she has to give herself to her benefactor, to the man who has saved her family from misery. So she marries this man she doesn't love, who's the mentor, who's a good man, but she doesn't love him, and she knows that. And the man she loves, she cannot marry because she feels that her life is not hers to give, that she belongs to other people. And in the same way that David Martín feels that even his life, he's not entitled to the things he wants. He thinks he's not worthy. And because they're broken characters, their lives have been stolen from them since childhood. And they're trying to survive in a world in which they only have each other. And both of them are going to meet a terrible end because they are just not able to survive. And David is the one that, maybe unluckily for him, outlives Christina and sees her die. And goes on losing his mind and falling into this abyss in which he can no longer tell what is real or not. He can no longer know if Christina's death is even his fault because Corelli somehow got into her mind and destroyed her because she was going to prevent him from continuing doing what he's doing. When she finds his manuscript and reads it, and she realizes what he's doing, she realizes essentially that David is going crazy, that he's writing this monstrous book for an imagined diabolical patron that nobody has seen. And she realizes that the man she loves and the man she has betrayed in a way because she couldn't give herself to him is even worse than she is.
Yeah.
And that is what brings her to her end. And but we're always, the novel is constructed in a way that what is interesting is rather than the author or the story telling you exactly how everything is, asking you to question that. That's why in a way it's a game. It's a game in which you need to step in and interpret the story, because the story could mean different things. And of course, when you read The Prisoner of Heaven, you're provided with one interpretation. You say, this is why the book is like that. This is why David Martin tells you that these things happened in his life. And maybe some of them just happened in his mind because he was falling down this big hole in his soul. But I think in that case, and I think that's why that is the most complex and difficult book to read in the series, and the one that is more confusing to readers, because they come from Shadow of the Wind, which is essentially a book that does all the work for you. Yeah. Takes you by the hand and leads you through this complicated system of stories and subplots, but essentially it does it for you. Yeah. It doesn't require for you to interpret or to step in and complete the story, while the Angel's Game is designed to do that.
And it's darker too, isn't it? Because David loses Christina in the coldness of the eyes, but there's a lot of fire in the books too, isn't it, Mr. Zafón? A lot of burned figures, burned books.
The imagery is that of fire, of destruction, of damnation, of condemnation. It's a hellish world.
Is it purification, or why is it used so much?
It's a descent into hell, essentially. David Martin's life is becoming hell, and the Barcelona of the city increasingly becomes more sinister until it becomes a nightmare world. And this is what David perceives. This is what he thinks. He thinks he's walking around like the night. He's walking around close to his home, and he feels like there are all these drops of rain that are like tears of glass that are falling slowly, and that there's something walking behind him, crossing this veil of tears, and that hand touches him. And he's essentially living in a nightmare of his own making, and that nightmare feeds upon his own imagination, upon these creations that he was making up for his series of books. So it's like he's using the weapons he has in his mind against him, his own demons, all these things that he's been imagining since he was a kid, since he was a very young man, is turning them against him. And it gets to the point where he can no longer know what is going on. When he goes to that house up there in the hill to confront Corelli, and he finds those puppets, or when he thinks that he is sick and that he's being operated and a spider walks out of a hole in his head.
Very strange.
This is very strange, and that how somehow it's submerged in a world in which there are souls floating around is essentially a nightmare, and it's a very hellish nightmare. But that's what his world is turning into. And I know that it may coming from Shadow of the Wind, which is a much sweeter book, this may seem a bit harsh, but I don't know, at some point I thought it could be interesting to explore this darker side of what can be the life of creation, of somebody who decides to devote their life to the world of the imagination, to create things, and that it's losing their mind. And that I thought it was something that intrigued me as a writer, and I wanted to write that story, even though I knew that many readers wouldn't like it, and that they were hoping for me or wanting me to repeat exactly the same thing. But I said, well, you know, I've already written that book. I'm trying to write another book that is part of that hopefully, you know, in time, I think readers will put in a different perspective, because I think the other books help you realize that what you thought didn't make any sense on its own actually makes sense and fits inside the puzzle.
Let's ask the readers if they liked the darkness or not, or if it was more difficult for them to find their way in that second book or that third book. Or are there any readers, iemand die een prangende vraag heeft voor meneer Zafón en die kijk, het zaallicht gaat een klein beetje aan. Ik kan niet meteen zien, maar als u uw hand opsteekt en een vraag heeft, dan kan ik die gerust wat luider herhalen hier in de microfoon. In de zaal zelf hebben we helaas geen microfoons. Grote fans die vragen hebben bij zaken die nog niet helemaal duidelijk zijn in de boeken?
They're either very shy or they're not convinced with my explanation.
Everything is
they
clear
say,
to
dude,
them.
that shit won't fly. We still don't like the Angels game.
Everything is clear to them. Maybe you should read a little part then, Mr. Zafón, from this brand new book to us, The Prisoner of Heaven. You will read in Spanish, isn't it?
We will read in Spanish.
El prisionero del
just
cielo.
for curiosity, how many of you actually speak or understand Spanish?
Oh, a lot of them.
A lot of people.
Wow.
I think we've been speaking in the wrong language
read
here.
in Spanish then.
Okay, so for those
we should have done the interview in Spanish then.
For those of you who are Spanish impaired, I think that a very nice translation into Dutch is going to be projected, but I'm going to read from the original version, and it's going to be brief, so don't suffer, you know. It's going to be over in a few minutes.
Maybe you should give a little introduction of where you will take us in the book.
Sure. I think we're going to read from the beginning of the second part. This is going to be first chapter of part 2, which is called De Entre los Muertos, From Among the Dead, and essentially describes the arrival of our good friend Fermín Romero de Torres into a terrible place, because his life is like that. He always ends up in the wrong places at the wrong time. So this is one of these occasions.
And he always saves himself, isn't it?
Well, he's a resilient man.
He's a survivor.
You can say that about him.
We will listen to you.
Okay, I feel like a priest here. It's never been my vocation, but it's never too late. Okay. So as I was saying, we're here in El Prisionero del Cielo, segunda parte de Entre los Muertos. Barcelona, 1939. A los prisioneros nuevos los traían de noche, en coches o furgonetas negras que cruzaban la ciudad en silencio desde la comisaría de Villa Layetana, sin que nadie reparase o quisiera reparar en ellos. Los vehículos de la Brigada Social ascendían la vieja carretera que escalaba la montaña de Montjuïc, y más de uno contaba que, al vislumbrar la silueta del castillo recortándose en lo alto contra las nubes negras que reptaban desde el mar, había sabido que nunca más volvería a salir de allí con vida. La fortaleza estaba anclada en lo más alto de la roca, suspendida entre el mar al este, la alfombra de sombras que desplegaba Barcelona al norte y la infinita ciudad de los muertos al sur. El viejo cementerio de Montjuïc, cuyo hedor escalaba la roca y se filtraba entre las grietas de la piedra y los barrotes de las celdas. En otros tiempos el castillo se había utilizado para bombardear la ciudad a cañonazos, pero apenas unos meses después de la caída de Barcelona en enero y la derrota final en abril, la muerte anidaba allí en silencio, y los barceloneses, atrapados en la más larga noche de su historia, preferían no alzar la vista al cielo para no reconocer la silueta de la prisión en lo alto de la colina. A los presos de la policía política se les asignaba un número al entrar. normalmente el de la celda que iban a ocupar y en la que probablemente iban a morir. Para la mayoría de los inquilinos, como alguno de los carceleros gustaba de referirse a ellos, el viaje al castillo era solo de ida. La noche que el inquilino número 13 llegó a Montjuïc llovía con fuerza. Pequeñas venas de agua ennegrecidas sangraban por los muros de piedra y el aire hedía tierra removida. 2 oficiales lo escoltaron a una sala en la que no había más que una mesa metálica y una silla. Una bombilla desnuda pendía del techo y parpadeaba cuando el pulso del generador flojeaba. Allí permaneció cerca de media hora esperando de pie, con las ropas empapadas y bajo la vigilancia de un centinela armado con un fusil. Finalmente se oyeron unos pasos. La puerta se abrió y entró un hombre joven que no debía llegar a los 30 años. Vestía un traje de lana recién planchado y olía a colonia. No tenía el aspecto marcial de un militar de carrera ni de un oficial de policía. Sus rasgos eran suaves y su gesto amable. El prisionero pensó que afectaba maneras de señorito y que desprendía aquel aire condescendiente de quien se siente por encima del lugar que ocupa y del escenario que comparte. El rasgo de su semblante que más llamaba la atención eran sus ojos, azules, penetrantes y afilados de codicia y recelo. Solo en ellos, tras aquella fachada de estudiada elegancia y cordial ademán, se intuía su naturaleza. Unos lentes redondos le agrandaban la mirada y el cabello engominado y peinado hacia atrás le confería un aire vagamente amanerado e incongruente con el siniestro decorado. El individuo tomó asiento en la silla tras el escritorio y desplegó una carpeta que portaba en la mano. Tras un somero análisis de su contenido, juntó las manos apoyando las yemas de los dedos bajo la barbilla y miró largamente al prisionero. Perdone, pero creo que se ha producido una confusión. El culatazo en el estómago le cortó la respiración y el prisionero cayó al suelo hecho un ovillo. Habla solo cuando el señor director te pregunte, indicó el centinela. En pie, ordenó el señor director con voz tremulosa, todavía poco acostumbrada a mandar. El prisionero consiguió ponerse en pie y enfrentó la mirada incómoda del señor director. Nombre: Fermín Romero de Torres. El prisionero reparó en aquellos ojos azules y leyó en ellos desprecio y desinterés. ¿Qué clase de nombre es ese? ¿Me tomas por tonto? Venga, nombre, el de verdad. El prisionero, un hombrecillo enclenque, tendió sus papeles al señor director. El centinela se los arrancó de la mano y los acercó a la mesa. El señor director echó un simple vistazo y chasqueó la lengua, sonriendo. Otro de los de Heredia, murmuró antes de tirar los documentos a la papelera. Estos papeles no valen. ¿Me vas a decir cómo te llames o nos vamos a tener que poner serios? El inquilino número 13 intentó formar unas palabras, pero le temblaban los labios y apenas fue capaz de balbucear algo inteligible. No tengas miedo, hombre, que nosotros no nos comemos a nadie. ¿Qué te han contado? Hay mucho rojo de mierda que se dedica a esparcir calumnias por ahí, pero aquí a la gente, si colabora, se la trata bien, como españoles. Venga, desnúdate. El inquilino pareció dudar un instante. El señor director bajó la mirada, como si todo aquel trance le incomodase y solo la tozudez del prisionero le retuviese allí. Un instante después, el centinela le propinó un segundo culatazo, esta vez en los riñones, que volvió a derribarlo. Ya has oído al señor director, en porreta, no tenemos toda la noche. El inquilino número 13 consiguió ponerse de rodillas y así se fue desprendiendo de las ropas ensangrentadas y sucias que lo cubrían. Una vez que estuvo completamente desnudo, el centinela le insertó el cañón del rifle bajo el hombro y le forzó a levantarse. El señor director alzó la vista del escritorio y esgrimió un gesto de disgusto al contemplar las quemaduras que le cubrían el torso, las nalgas y buena parte de los muslos. Parece que aquí el campeón es un viejo conocido de fumero, comentó el centinela. Usted cállese, ordenó el director con escasa convicción. Miró al prisionero con impaciencia y comprobó que estaba llorando. Venga, no llores y dime cómo te llamas. El prisionero susurró de nuevo su nombre. Fermín Romero de Torres. El señor director suspiró, hastiado. Mira, me estás empezando a agotar la paciencia. Quiero ayudarte y no me apetece tener que llamar a Fumero y decirle que estás aquí. El prisionero empezó a gemir como un perro herido y a temblar tan violentamente que el señor director, a quien claramente desagradaba la escena y deseaba concluir el trámite cuanto antes, intercambió una mirada con el centinela y, sin mediar palabra, se limitó a anotar en el registro el nombre que le había dado el prisionero y a maldecir por lo bajo. «Mierda de guerra», murmuró para sí, cuando se llevaron al prisionero a su celda, arrastrándole desnudo por los túneles encharcados.
And now, Mr. Zafón, there's a piano there. It isn't there for nothing.
I thought you were going to play it.
I won't play. I think you will play, but you...
My intention was that reading a few pages would clear the theater and people would run away, but you're still here.
No.
So we have a harsher method, which is playing the piano for a while. That I think they'll do it. They'll just run away in a panic.
No, I think they'll stay because I think, like me, they're quite curious about your playing the piano because you do it while you're writing,
lower your expectations right away. This is the moment when you abandon all hope.
Still, you make your own compositions. Don't be so modest.
I do. The thing is that what I like most in the world other than books is music. I enjoy music very much. And I have this strange habit that I had for many years in which I like to write music for my own stories. And sometimes it helps me evoke an atmosphere, a character, a scene. It's a way for me sometimes to get away from the desk, go to the piano and try to find an idea, a musical idea that will help me sketch something or try to find a connection. And it's something that I do without any pretension. I do it for myself. I'm not trying to get John Williams out of a job or anything like that. So it's music that has really no value. It's something that I do for fun. It's not my job. I'm a writer. I'm not a musician.
But it helps you on the way. It's a kind of mingling process.
It helps me because these tiny and silly little pieces sometimes evoke an emotion, an atmosphere, and a scene, a character. And sometimes this helps me concentrate on something, or in the same way that sometimes, there are authors who make drawings of their characters, and this helps them in a way to find something, to find an angle. And sometimes it's just an excuse to get away from a problem you're trying to solve that you're not finding the way to really get to the point of that. And sometimes you think about it and try to solve it musically, which of course sometimes allows you to see things from a different angle, and then when you get back, you see the solution or you see a way. So I do that, and I keep piling up these tiny little miniatures of music around the story I'm working on. And by the end of it, I end up having a lot of it, like 80 minutes or 90 minutes of music, which ends up being kind of a music score to the story.
And you write them down, so make your own composition.
I write it down, I
notes?
record it. Sometimes there are pieces that are simple or just for piano. Sometimes there are pieces that are more complicated and they're for an ensemble, and I try to orchestrate them and try to write the different parts, and it's something that essentially I do for fun.
Yeah.
I have fun doing that, and since there's no harm done, I always think, for many years nobody heard that music. And years ago, the only reason I started showing it to people is because years ago, when we were producing the audiobook for Shadow of the Wind in the United States with Penguin, the producers of the audiobook called me and said, well, what about music for the audiobook? We hire a composer, and we are kind of in doubt about the music. Can you listen to that, see what you think? And they show me the music, and it was horrendous. And I say, oh my God, confiscate this guy's instruments right away. He shouldn't have a license to practice. It's dangerous. And they say, yeah, we felt like that. I say, don't put any music. No, but we wanted to put music. And I say, if you need to put music, there's already music written for the story. And I told them, I do this kind of silly thing in which, I have fun writing music.
And they put it on the...
And then I send them a whole CD with the score for Shadow of the Wind. And everybody loved it. And everybody, wow, but this is great. Well, you should do an edition of this. We should sell it commercially. And say, no. I don't want you to sell this commercially. I never wrote this music thinking it was going to be heard by people, and I don't want to be exploited commercially. The most you can do is print a few CDs as gifts. And sometimes if we would organize an event such as that, or at a public library or a theater, maybe as a gift to somebody in the organization who had been kind enough to accommodate us, we say, well, you know, we're having this horrible music for you. So you're going to regret actually organizing the event. And you know, at worst case scenario, it was a nice coaster, so there was no harm done anyway. So, but what happened is one of these CDs ended up at a classical radio music station.
Yes.
And the guy who played music there, the DJ, so to speak, listened to it and liked it very much and said, you know, every night they would play an entire CD in its entirety for their audience. And then I say, yeah, tonight we have something different. It's something new we found that we think you may like, so we're going to play it for you. And as usually it's the case when you play music on the radio, people call. Mm-hmm. What is that CD? What is this music? I want to buy it. And they say, well, you know, you cannot buy it. Turns out it's a limited edition. It's kind of a promotional thing, but it's not commercially available. It's not being released. And we just got hold of this, and we thought you guys would enjoy it. And that's why we are playing it, but it's not in the stores. And apparently that was the end of it. Turns out that this was heard by the owner of the station, who the next day called this guy and wanted to fire him, because he told him, you cannot play music that can't be bought. Oui. So this guy instinct. Almost lost his job. I guess at the end he didn't. Probably he swore that he would spend the rest of his lifetime playing Britney Spears records on the radio or something like that, so he could feed his family. But this made me thought, you know, if this guy almost lost his job over this music, maybe, and people enjoy it, maybe I can make it available for free download or sometimes as a gift to readers or something like that. So if you're very intrigued, you can go to various websites of my publishers, either in the UK, in Germany, in Spain, and you can find a lot of this music for download, and you can have your own beautiful coaster where you put your beer. So you use it, you hang it on your balcony, and it's very convenient to scare away birds. You know, if you have a problem with pigeons who take a dump on your nice home, as they usually do.
But it's even better
this
to
thing,
listen
if it's
to
twisting in the wind, apparently scares the shit out of them.
But even better
said. And so that's my recommendation. So without further ado, I hope your expectations are very low. I'm going to play for just 2 minutes. And I'm not sure when I'm going to play. I was thinking on the way here, what the hell I'm going to play?
Is it a soundtrack for The Prisoner of Heaven?
I think I'm going to play a couple of ideas I've been working on for scenes and for characters of the new book, the fourth book in the series.
That might
that's going to be it. So I hope you have your earplugs, and it will be over before you know.
Okay, we're looking forward to it. I think the atmosphere was quite joyful of the music already. We're looking forward to the fourth book, but first we're going to enjoy
the continuation in the next Eurovision Festival. We'll sing a duo for you all.
Okay, that's a deal. Mr. Zafón will also sign his books, The Prisoner of Heaven, hier in de gang naar de foyer toe. Daar mag u uw boek laten signeren en wordt ook nog een glaasje cava aangeboden. Thank you all for listening to us tonight.